Many people said this could be the best game of the season or the bowl season.
I can tell you it's the game that I was excited about calling when the matchups were made. And no disrespect to Washington, but I think when you look at this on paper, I mean, you've got a very even matchup. You got two teams that are really experienced in big games, which I think is a factor in these games. I think how you approach the pressure of the playoff, how you handle your business in a monster game after a layoff, sometimes takes some experience. I mean, Clemson has proven itself as a really great big game team. Meyer has proven himself over the years as being as good as anybody in these situations, and a lot of players on Ohio State are inexperienced, but they've got key guys like Barrett who have been there in the past, and got enough guys who were a part of the run a couple of years ago to steady the ship. But having said that, it's still Clemson with a little bit more, I think, experience in big games. They've played and won 2 conference championship games. Obviously, as an underdog against Oklahoma last year in the Orange Bowl, wore them down. I think it's interesting to see how coaches approach playoffs. We've only 3 years in this system. It's not quite a bowl game, right? I mean, it's a different idea. It's not the ultimate game.
No, Coach
You
Saban
win,
says
and
it's an adjustment.
immediately you think about a bigger game in 8 or 9 days. So we haven't had enough years in this system to see if coaches have perfected it. You know, you have to look to the lower division playoffs for a parallel.
Do you look at a team like Clemson? They've had a lot of close calls this year. There's a lot of games. Well, of course, they did lose a bit, but they've had games maybe they should have lost, and yet they prevailed. Do you think that builds something inside the team?
No doubt. I mean, I think it's part of their culture now. I think that Dabo has instilled that we're about the fourth quarter. We're about guts. We're about coming from behind. And the results have backed it up. But they got an incredible record in games decided by 7 points or less. It's by far the best in the last few years. And if you look at this year, you know, they're 8 down going to the fourth quarter against Louisville, 8 down going to the fourth quarter against Florida State. So they come back, win both those games. It was almost a shock when they lost the close game to Pitt. I mean, they lose it on a late field goal, but that's the kind of games they always seem to win, and we expect them to win. I mean, I think that Ohio State can draw on success in close games too, though. So
both are spread teams, but are they a little different in their styles?
yeah, I mean, I think all spreads have their wrinkles. I think what they have in common is that both have quarterbacks who can run the ball, and in bigger games tend to run it more. They tend to count on quarterback runs. The bigger the game, the more they count on it. And Deshaun and JT, I was wondering, what would the over/under be on design quarterback runs in this game, or just runs, period? Because they're run-pass options. I was thinking 30-35, you know, if it's a close game and both teams feel like they need that. And I think that, you know, when it's close and tight, play callers tend to go with what is the most reliable, what has the least moving parts, right? And I think Warner feels very comfortable calling a run for JT in those situations, and obviously Clemson feels really comfortable putting the ball in Deshaun's hands, and you know, the history bears that out.
Do you think this will be a game where the defenses kind of, you know, both teams got very good defenses, top 10 defenses, that everybody's talking about the quarterbacks and the offenses, that it might be the defense?
Yeah, I think both defenses at the beginning of the year were quote-unquote question marks. Both teams lost a lot on defense. They lost some incredible star players who are in the NFL, so both defenses carried into the season a chip on their shoulder. Everybody knew the offenses were going to be good on both sides, especially on the Clemson side. So I think defensively, both teams have grown a lot and answered a lot of questions, and I think they'll have something to prove in a game like this. But you know, I'll tell you, these games have tended to be shootouts when you have this much time to prepare. I mean, look at what Ohio State's teams have done in bowl games and playoff games. They scored a ton of points, and Clemson's the same way too. So.
I don't know if you're old enough to remember this, but do you know where you were?
I'll bet you I am.
When Woody
Yeah, I was watching on TV.
If that happened today, can you imagine? I mean, he was fired, I know, but I remember this kid, kind of run away and he down there. Can you imagine how long in today's world something like that would explode?
Yeah, I think that was such a sad chapter for anybody that had affection for him or for the sport to have it end that way. But you're right, it would be on Twitter on a GIF in about 15 seconds, and it would be replayed, and at every hot take show would be talking about it for a month. I mean, I think that when Clemson and Ohio State get together, that moment is recycled, and we'll show it just because that was the first time
Were you
we ever
watching
met.
it live?
Oh yeah, I watched it live.
What do you remember? How old were you, if you don't mind?
I was 16. I was born in '62, so.
What did you do? Were you watching with other people? Did you turn around and go, did you stop?
I don't recall watching with other people, but I remember, if you recall, if you watch it, they didn't talk about it on television. The technology has changed. I'll tell you, that's what's different. If that happened in this game, we have 50 cameras on it. We'd have 50 angles of it. I mean, it wasn't talked about on the air in the broadcast because they didn't see it live. There was if you're doing a piece on this, you should research it. But there was something where they had to get the replay from New York to actually see what happened, and only after the fact. I remember I saw it. I mean, I saw it. He hit him in the neck. I mean, what was if you look at it, if you analyze it, I mean, he didn't. What he said. He brought the hips and he hit the core. We hit him in the only spot you can hit a football player and hurt him.
Right.
So it might have been one of those crazy, sad things in the moment, but he hit him in the neck. I mean, that's the only place you can hurt a player.
Does it surprise you that the other guy in that scenario, Charlie Bauman from Clemson, doesn't like to talk about it, doesn't ever talk about it, won't really do interviews on it?
I've understood that he's never talked about it.
Right.
He's very happy to have it go away, but it's going to be brought up again this week. I think it's.
Ohio State games.
He lives up in Ohio. Yeah.
State games. Isn't life great?
It's interesting. I think it's a sign of class that he hasn't. That he's declined to talk about it because he gets it, and I think at the time I don't think he talked about it a lot either, which it shows a lot of maturity in the moment because the guy's an extreme legend, did a lot for the sport, a lot for Ohio State, and to have it end that way, to have that be the lasting memory wouldn't be right, and I don't think that him talking about it would have helped.
And my final question for you: the keys for both teams. What when you come down to it, one key for each team to come away with the win.
I mean, it's not original, but can Ohio State take the ball away? Can they create turnovers, pick sixes? They've done it all year, and Clemson's been so vulnerable to turnovers. I mean, this is anybody that follows the Tigers knows that if they don't turn the ball over, they haven't been stopped. And if they don't turn the ball over, they haven't been in close games, period. So if they can avoid those red zone mistakes, I mean, I tend to trust Deshaun in big moments. I think that, he's as good as there is with the ball in his hands at the end of a tight game. And so you just don't expect him to make those mistakes. But Ohio State's really, really good at ball hawking, and it's not an accident that they take picks back to the house. They practice it. They practice interception returns for touchdowns, and they have a technique and they have patterns that they follow. And so, if Clemson doesn't give them the short field or doesn't give them a defensive score, I tend to feel like they're gonna move the ball because they have on everybody. But that's. I mean, I could sit here and say stop the run, but that's even more boring than turnovers.
What have you seen from Deshaun in big games, particularly last year, what he did against Alabama here?
His calm. First of all, I think he prepares better than anybody. So I think preparation leads to confidence in big moments, and so he knows that there's nothing that they can throw at him that he's not ready for. I think he's just born that way. I think he's naturally a very calm, poised guy, and the team feeds off of that. So when you have that demeanor, it allows you to focus and just execute. I think that it's fun when he shows his emotional side too. I like when Deshaun gets fired up because you tend to think of him as such a calm, poised guy, but I've seen him a couple times this year where he shows that side of him, whether it's the Louisville game or the Florida State game, and you get to see him in pregame get fired up and be that kind of an emotional leader. Once the game starts, he tends to bring the calm. And I think that, too, you've got an offense where you've got a lot of moving pieces. I mean, one reason why they're so hard to stop in big moments is because it's not a guy that they count on. I mean, if you look at the receiving core and guys who weren't even in the playoff last year, I mean, that's why I think that Clemson's a good matchup against anybody they play. If they play Alabama again, I like the matchup. Even though Bama's defense, I think, has improved and reacted to what happened against Clemson last year to get faster, I still think that there's so many weapons that they have. You throw in Kane and Williams, who weren't even there last year. I mean, think about that. As good as their offense was in the last two games of the season, number 8 and number 7 weren't in there. So you put those guys back in there. All the other pieces are basically in place. Give them a month. I mean, do you think they're going to go 3 and out a bunch of times? I don't.
Not that Deshaun hadn't already had impressive games, but what did your opinion at all change after you saw what he did to Alabama last year?
Well, I think everybody's opinion changes because Alabama's defense is the ultimate test in college football, and I think that, again, they come in very well prepared. So nothing that Clemson's going to show them really surprises them. It comes down to just execution, not making mistakes. And when you have a guy step up on the biggest stage, I mean, we knew what Deshaun could do. I think it was a wake-up call for a lot of the country that hadn't followed Clemson closely. But this guy was able to go out there and put 40 points in Alabama and so rattle Nick Saban that he's onside kicking to keep the ball away from Clemson's offense. I mean, it's the ultimate compliment. And I think that if it's Clemson, Alabama again, I promise you they'll spend 8 or 9 days not sleeping very well on that side, trying to figure out how to improve and defend against him.
Chris, can you talk about what it means for a non-conference team getting into the Final Four and what that means for college football? Does it diminish at all trying to win a conference championship?
Well, I'm not the biggest believer that a conference championship is a requirement for the playoff. From day one, they said the 4 best teams. In year 3, we finally have our first non-conference champion. To be honest with you, I thought we would have one in the first 2 years.